When you dig beneath the surface of the political headlines this week, or for that matter, most any week, you're going to find the rest of the story they may not want you to know. For example, the Florida House would want you to know that it unanimously passed a bill to improve boater safety. Lucy's Law is named after Lucy Fernandez, a 17-year-old girl who tragically died in a careless boating accident. And the bill, if signed and implemented as presented, would increase penalties for reckless boating and require boaters to take a safety course.
According to FWC statistics, over 80% of the operators in fatal boating accidents had no formal boater education, and 75% were older than 36 years old.
But here's the part they may not want you to know. They've done this or something much like this a time or two before, and then backed away from it under the pressure of money, power, and politics. For example, before Lucy's Law, they passed Osmani's Law. Isabel Castellanos called for it after her son Osmani died in a crash.
And a lot of people in this country don't understand the pain of a mother. You know, people think that I should be over it. I can never be over the death of my son.
And when she asked state lawmakers to beef up safety laws, she discovered who had the real clout.
You talk to one and they'll say, you're fighting the boating industry. We need money for the lobbyists to fight against the boating industry.
They've said this?
Yeah. It's all about money. It's all about power.
Even so, she still convinced lawmakers to pass legislation improving boater safety. But after the photo ops, after she left town, they watered it down. We drove to her home and showed her the revisions they made after she left the Capitol.
Now you gave me a surprise that things have changed. It's okay. I'm glad you did, because you opened up my eyes, something that's so simple, and yet now they washed it down.
Now, whether they do that again this year remains to be seen, or unseen, as we've seen in years past.
The people better stand up and notice that you don't have the protection that you think you do.
For example, a prior session passed a bill promoting healthy food in school, but it also did something else in the fine print. It weakened protections for fire victims. The legislature passed a law that protects a negligent contractor, if there's negligence, from the victims?
That's exactly right.
And fire victims discovered that after they lost their homes.
I mean, we worked our butt off for what we have. And now we just, hanging by a thread.
The legislature also created a tax credit system to help rebuild blighted and distressed neighborhoods that winds up steering most of the credits to expanding Orlando theme parks and luxury resorts. And year after we called them out on it, and Republican leaders said, yeah, that's got to change.
The success record is just not there, but more importantly, it's just not right.
To this day, it keeps going, with millions going to Universal as it continues to expand and open a new theme park.
I'm here. I see it. They don't need that. Little people like us do. Little neighborhoods like this one do.
In other news this week, Governor DeSantis also flew on the state plane to Idaho and Montana to press those states to pass a balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
And it requires 3/4 of the states to ratify any changes to the Constitution.
Well, supporters say a federal balanced budget requirement would help our government dig out of debt.
Is basically limiting the ability of politicians in Washington to bankrupt the country.
Opponents say it could tank our economy and deepen recessions by restricting deficit spending in times we may need it to get through a crisis. But putting those pros and cons aside, here's the rest of the story he may not want you to know. The governor said the reason he spent the time and state money going to Montana is to get that state to pass it this session.
Why are we talking about this at this moment?
Well, I think it's because this is something during the session that the legislature can certify.
Meaning that he spent his time during Florida session and spent our money apparently not knowing Montana's bill filing deadline has already passed. By law, Montana cannot pass what he flew there to stump for this year or for that matter, even next year in regular session, because they will not reconvene until 2027.
So now's the perfect time to do it.
Which puts the reporter's question in Montana and the tone in which he asked it in context. We'll play it again.
Why are we talking about this at this moment?
Well, I think it's because this is something during the session that the legislature can certify.
Meanwhile, in Idaho and on social media, DeSantis boasted of returning more than $878 million, taxpayer dollars, from Florida back to Washington.
They got on the phone to Treasury, and within 30 minutes, we had a plan to do it.
Oh, that turned heads back in Tallahassee, where they're currently trying to nail down the budget. And upon further review, it was less than $50 million in federal transportation funds actually returned. A spokeswoman for the Republican House Speaker said that $878 million figure, well, it mostly relates to funds that are already in Washington that were available and allocated to Florida that the governor does not now intend to request. And that includes health funds that DeSantis' office had specifically requested 3 years ago, noting that without additional budget support, tuberculosis and STDs could spread and put the health of all Floridians at risk. Just a few examples of the headlines in context as the budget takes shape and as lawmakers spin it. We'll have much more to come in our next installment of Money, Power, and Politics.